Long time no see. Welcome back to the Hook 'em Hoops podcast. Tommy Yarrish alongside Jason Kinander. Zach Davis not with us today, but trust me, we'll bring him back or if we're nice enough. Just kidding. We miss you, Zach. Super happy to be back here with you guys. It has been a busy off season for the Longhorns. A lot of new faces on campus. We'll get to that in a moment. But I think the biggest news of the off season is that Texas basically traded Jason Kinander for Arthur Kaluma. Jason, you're in Kansas now, covering the Wildcats. Congratulations on the new job. You can go ahead and tell
Thank
folks
you.
about it. Give some plug if you want.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm working for 13 News here in Topeka, Kansas, based out of Manhattan. I'll be covering a lot of K-State sports, football, of course, men's basketball, women's basketball. Super excited to be here. Thank you for the kind words, Tommy. Excited about this opportunity. Excited for the sports to start up. But glad that I have about a month and a half to really get settled here and get used to life in the Prairie State. And I like it here. It's nice. I can get used to this for a little bit.
Seems like you're having a nice time so far, and really a good trade for both sides. Texas gets some size that they needed for their last roster spot, and Topeka's getting a fantastic sports reporter. So I think everybody's pretty happy. And speaking of happiness, we're going to start off talking about this roster and how happy we think Rodney Terry is with the group that he's built. So we'll just quickly go through. Coming in this year is Trey Johnson, Nick Cody, Jamie Vinson, Malik Presley, Jordan Pope, Julian Larry, Jason Kent, Tremont Mark, and Arthur Kaluma. Heading out, yeah, if you thought that was long, heading out is Dylan Dessou, Max Asmus, Brock Cunningham after 20 years, Chris Johnson, Tyrese Hunter, IT Horton, Gavin Perryman, Alex Anamekwe, Dylan Mitchell, and Jackson Prince. And then the only four guys that were retained from last year's group are Devin Pryor, Caden Shedrick, Zarek Onyema, and Kendall Weaver. So a lot of new faces.
Well, and some of the walk-ons. I mean, you mentioned some of the walk-ons as players on the way out. Some of the walk-ons are sticking around. Like I'd assume Preston Clark will still be there.
Fair point, I guess. But anyways, so when it comes to people who played, meaningful minutes, no offense to Preston Clark, you only keep four guys. So there's going to be a lot of newness on this team. A majority of that newness, though, comes from the transfer portal, which I think will be beneficial. They get some SEC experience with Tremont Mark coming over, Arthur Kaluma kind of towards the end of this cycle of additions and subtractions for college basketball teams as they start summer workouts. Trey Johnson's the top 10 player in the class of 2025. That was a recruitment that Ronnie Terry, I think, did a great job from the beginning when he was at, was it Lake Highlands, I think, in Dallas, but his senior season at Link Prep in Missouri. This is a guy who very easily could have gone the Ron Holland, AJ Johnson route and tried to go pro early, but he decides to come to Texas. So having a lottery pick on this Texas team, Jason, I think is going to be huge. The question is, what kind of a role does Trey assume? Is he going to be their go-to scorer, or is he just going to be Mr. Do-It-All and kind of do a little bit of everything at a very high level? Because when you think about it, when was the last time that Texas had a freshman that impacted the game at such a high level, thinking like dating back to Kevin Durant? You would think about Mo Bamba, I would throw in there, I think, as well. I think the X factor for this season is, what does Trey Johnson look like?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that Trey Johnson's obviously going to play big minutes because he's one of the top prospects, top recruits in the country. Other than outside of Trey Johnson, there are a ton of mouths to feed on this Texas offense. You bring in Jordan Pope from Oregon State. He was the leading scorer there, top scoring option for the Beavers. Tremont Mark, who's the top scoring option for Arkansas. Like you said, he has that SEC experience, so I'm sure that he's going to be expecting to have the ball in his hands a lot. Jason Kent and Julian Larry definitely did not transfer from Indiana State, bypassing joining their former head coach at St. Louis just to have minimal roles at Texas. And so they're going to get a lot of run. And then Arthur Kaluma is a high volume shooter, not necessarily a high volume scorer. I think his shot selection is very questionable at times, but he is a productive player on both ends of the floor when he wants to be. Then you have Kendall Weaver coming back. You have Caden Shedrick coming back. There are a lot of players who Texas is going to need to make happy this upcoming season. But if Rodney Terry can make the pieces fit, the talent is there for Texas to not only compete in the SEC, but to make a run in March because they have that experience. They have 5 grad transfers, 5 redshirt senior grad transfers, if you count Caden Shedrick, because he was a grad transfer last year. They have 5 players who are grad transfers, seniors. I think that is a ton of experience, and it's awesome that they're pairing that with Trey Johnson, who is a true freshman. I think Kendall Weaver brings back a lot of experience playing meaningful minutes last year. And then Jordan Pope is probably the most talented player who they acquired in the transfer portal, and he still is going to have a year of eligibility after this year. So for Texas, you have to be excited about the transfer haul. I agree with some of the criticisms, some of the questions too about how will these pieces fit. There are a lot of players who have the ball in their hand a lot and shoot, but aren't the most efficient scoring players. And so Texas is going to need to zero in on what those players do well and maximize that on offense next season. But these are players who fit Rodney Terry's system of playing fast for the most part. They're talented basketball players. They've played at a high level. They're highly touted transfers. And so it's exciting to have that many players on one team. But it's TBD how they're all going to fit until we see how the season starts off for Texas. And luckily, our next topic here is the schedule and the non-conference schedule, which is a lot stronger than last year.
Before we get to that, I think that you have a fair point with the criticism of how the roster is constructed. But I think if the biggest problem that you've got going into the season is figuring out like who's going to be your higher volume guys versus others, that's a pretty good problem to have, because if those high volume guys one night just can't get it going, you've got guys you can turn to, right? When I think back to that Elite Eight team a couple of years ago, when you've got, Marcus Carr, Timmy Allen, Dylan Dessou, Tyrese Hunter, if one of them didn't get it going, somebody else picked up the slack. And I think that's one of the things that allowed Texas to go on that deep run. So I'm not comparing the two teams or saying that they're similar by any stretch of the imagination, but in the sense that they can have that same kind of mannerism where if one guy can't get it going, let's say Jordan Pope's having an off night. Okay, Trey Johnson can pick up his slack. If Tremont Marks having an off night, maybe Arthur Kaluma can knock some shots down, so on and so forth. So that's interesting to study too. And in contrast from this year's team to last year's team, just kind of like projected lineup, I would say. And Jason, this is what I put down. You let me know if you think it's correct or not. I've got Jordan Pope running point, Trey Johnson, Tremont Mark, Arthur Kaluma, and Caden Shedrick. That's your dream starting five with this roster, I think. And then as far as rotation goes, Kendall Weaver, Julian Larry, and Jason Kent are probably your first 3 off the bench. And then after that, I think it's going to come down to who has the best offseason and who, really steps up and takes advantage of the opportunity and impresses Rodney Terry's staff the most. You've got Devin Pryor, who the staff seems to be very high on, super athletic guy who kind of came out of high school early to play for Texas last year. They wanted him to be a developmental piece, and he seems to be progressing pretty well. Can Zarek Onyema take that next step and kind of relieve his early struggles from last year? Jamie Vinson comes in as a big high school guy. They get Malik Presley, Sam Marcus product back in his kind of home area, and then Nick Cody kind of still rehabbing an injury right now from his high school ranks, but can he be promising? So Jason, what do you think of that rotation, and who can be those 4th or maybe even 5th options off the bench if Rodney Terry wants to go 9 or 10 deep?
I think that Julian Larry is the perfect player off the bench for this Texas team because he brings in speed, he brings in strong decision making, and he impacts winning. And so for Julian Larry to be sort of the first transfer addition for Texas to get the ball rolling, we might have thought that he'd be starting going into the season. And now that the transfer portal has kind of shaken out the way that it has, I think that Julian Larry is their perfect 6th man off the bench, sort of in that Serge Abari Rice role almost, which was something that Texas really missed last year. Julian Larry's a high-level shooter, too. Shoots over 40% from 3. And so for him to play that high-level basketball, efficient basketball, would be super, super exciting for Texas. Another player who I'm excited to watch off the bench is Kendall Weaver. We saw him play an expanded role last year. there were good and bad parts of that. But for him to have more of a finite role off the bench will be super exciting for Texas. And I'm really excited to watch Kendall kind of come into his own more as a shooter. This was the guy who we heard a lot about shooting the basketball last season, going into last season, and we just didn't really see it because the touches weren't there. He wouldn't even shoot open shots at times. So I'm hoping that with a whole summer under his belt, he will become an improved shooter. And then Jason Kent from Indiana State is also an exciting addition. He is somebody who brings size off the bench. He's a multidimensional scorer. He's a physical basketball player. And physicality was something that Texas was missing last year, too. And so we'll have to see, like you said, who looks the best in summer and going down the stretch of the fall when Texas plays those exhibitions. I think that it will also benefit Texas, though, to maybe not have five guys who make 30 plus starts. If you have, like, Tremont Mark's going to be starting, and Arthur Kaluma is going to be starting, and Caden Shedrick's going to be starting, and then you rotate everyone else around. As long as everyone's playing 20 plus minutes a night and having the ball in their hands enough, whatever is helping you win that night against whatever team you're playing, I think would benefit Texas. And so it's exciting that they have a deeper team. We're also forgetting about Devon Pryor, who has another year under his belt. Nick Cody, who comes in with a top 40 recruiting pedigree. And so this is a team with a lot of talent, a lot of depth, a lot of guys who are good at different things in coming off the bench. And so it'll just be a matter of who ends up shooting the ball the best, playing within their role the best, who will be starting in those two or three guard positions for Texas. Because I think Kaluma is going to start no matter what. Tremont Mark's going to start no matter what. And you probably have to start Caden Shedrick no matter what because of his size. And so besides that, they'll probably rotate guys around, but I'm excited to see who it ends up being. I'm excited to see the combinations. They have a luxury now of being able to run out, 7 or 8 different players who are capable starters. So that's definitely a good luxury for Rodney Terry.
It is. And, as far as depth on the bench goes, I think if you had to pick 2 more guys that might see an increased role just because of this roster, I think Devin Pryor is one of them, just because we've heard so many good things, and he seems to be progressing really well. His athleticism, I think, is close to, if not on par, that of Dylan Mitchell's, which is a high compliment because Dylan Mitchell could jump out of the building.
Yeah.
And then Jamie Vincent, simply because he's 6'11". Like in this transfer portal saga, Texas fans were clamoring for a big man, which, I mean, understandably so. If they had had one last year, or if Caden Shedrick had been healthy enough last year to be a reliable two-way player, it probably would have helped him out a lot. That said, you got to remember that these Texas rosters have never been built really to have a big man. I think last year we talked about how the tallest guy they'd had before Shedrick came was Kai Jones, and that was 3 years prior. Yeah. So Texas historically has not played with a lot of size in their lineups. And you think that that's with 3 straight head coaches. That's with Shaka Smart, that's with Chris Beard, and that's with Rodney Terry. They just haven't done that a lot. So I would just say expect small ball. I was going into the offseason expecting small ball. That said, had they have gotten of course, now I'm blanking on a JT Toppin. Had they have gotten a guy like JT Toppin, it's not like you're going to turn him down. But at the same time, they're not going to necessarily change their identity and all of a sudden roll out 2 guys who are 6'10", 6'11 plus and play with 2 big men. That's just not how Texas has played basketball historically. Maybe that changes someday, but for this season, I don't think it will. Does that mean that there are problems defensively? We'll have to see about that. But as far as size goes, Jason, here's an interesting point. When you look at this year's starting 5 versus last year's, Texas is noticeably bigger 1 through 5. This year, Jordan Pope, 6 foot, Trey Johnson and Teron Mark are 6'6", Arthur Kaluma 6'7", Caden Shedrick is 6'11". Last year, Max Asmus and Tyrese Hunter, both 6 foot, Dylan Mitchell 6'8", Dylan Dessou is 6'9", and IT Horton is 6'5". Max Asmus being listed at 6 foot, I think, is a generous compliment. So when you factor that in, I think being bigger 1 through 5, it's not going to completely erase some of the defensive issues that Texas had last year, like just not being able to rebound against Tennessee, but it might not hurt. The bleeding might not hurt as much. What do you think?
With Caden Shedrick, we forget that this is a guy who did not have an offseason last year. And so now with him having a full offseason under his belt, being healthy, running with the team, being in the gym, he's going to be more durable this upcoming season. That's great. You expect that that will positively impact his play on the court. Tommy, I'm worried that this guy's going to stay on the court, though. He would have 4 fouls in 10 minutes against West Virginia. That just can't happen in the SEC. And so Caden Shedrick is going to need to play smart basketball, especially as one of the senior leaders, one of the few returning players on this Texas team. That's point A for the rebounding. Point two, Arthur Kaluma is going to need to play smart and selfless basketball. At times, Arthur Kaluma is a player who, there's some of those big players who kind of ball handle and shoot like point guards, and they don't have the numbers, the shooting splits to match. And unfortunately, Arthur Kaluma is one of those players. He has all the talent in the world. He's a capable shot maker, but he's not a smart shot taker, and that affects his defense at times too. Texas is going to need him to be a strong body defender and a force on the defensive glass because they just don't have forwards with his size on the roster. And then third, for your question about rebounding, they have bigger guards. That's a benefit that this roster hasn't had in recent years. And now, you have 6'6" Trey Johnson, 6'6" Tremont Mark, 6'4" Jordan Pope, or he's 6'2", 6'3", but still, taller than the guards who they've been running out in recent years. They need to rebound to that height. And if Texas can, then this is going to be a team where, you have just Caden Shedrick at center and then whatever you get out of Nick Cody in his freshman year, and then Arthur Kaluma too, and then all the guards can make up for that rebounding because they're athletic, they're quick, and they're bigger than everyone else. So to answer your question, I hope the rebounding will be different than it has been in seasons past. I have to see it before I believe it, but there's no reason to believe it won't be different because you have different players and a different profile on this team that Texas hasn't had in years past.
Yeah, and I think, when you think of rebounding with last year's team, I think Dylan Mitchell didn't pan out the way Texas fans thought he would. But one thing he was very good at was cleaning the glass off. This was a guy who you could rely on to have double doubles when you needed him to. He might not have gotten it done on the scoring end, but he really could rebound. So who kind of slides into that role? Maybe that is Arthur Kaluma. If this Texas staff wants to limit him on his shots, or if he's taking bad shots and just needs to focus on one aspect of the game, can he turn into that glass cleaning guy not named Caden Shedrick? I think that'll be something interesting to watch as well. Jason kind of talked about it before. We'll move into the schedule now for Texas. Starting off with non-conference, they'll open the season. Yeah, he's excited about this. They open the season.
Playing people. They're finally playing teams.
They really did schedule very strongly to start off the year. And we'll talk about how that affects their tournament outlook after this. They open the season against Ohio State, schedule a home and home against UConn that'll start in Austin. They go to the Legends Classic against Syracuse, St. Joe's, and Texas Tech. And they're at NC State, fresh off a Final Four for the SEC ACC Challenge. And in conference, by the way, if you thought Texas moving from the Big 12 to the SEC was going to make things easier in basketball, it's not. This conference is loaded. They've got home and homes with Oklahoma, Texas A&M, and Arkansas, so all their Southwest Conference rivals. They're at Ole Miss and Florida as well.
Really quick, I wish that Ole Miss game was at home.
Oh, that the first time Chris Beard comes back to Austin, that is going to be a madhouse.
Yeah.
That'll be really fun to watch.
And the other thing that's tough about that is like Chris Beard may not be in Oxford next year. Like this might be his last year at Ole Miss, especially if he has a good year. Like the door's going to open for him to take another big job that he'll want. And so it's kind of unfortunate. Like unless he stays in the SEC, like we're going to need to kind of cross our fingers that he stays at Ole Miss because otherwise there's no way that he'll schedule a game in Austin or that they'll schedule him here.
I don't think that game would be as bad as when he went to Texas Tech as the Texas head coach, but it'll certainly be very interesting. So those are the two away games that I circled as like really big ones. I think Ole Miss, obviously because of Beard, he's built a pretty good roster over there to start off year two. Florida has been playing really well, and I think they're kind of ascending back to higher relevancy as a program. And the home slate for Texas is loaded, and I think that's favorable for them in year one. They'll host Alabama, Kentucky, Tennessee, and Auburn. So four of the, not to mention Arkansas. So
Yeah.
you've got four, or if not five, of the best teams in the SEC coming into the Moody Center, where Texas has played very well. They're going to have to continue playing well if they want to take full advantage of what I would say is a favorable conference schedule. I don't know if you'd agree with that, Jason, but
Uh,
this team should absolutely finish in the top half of the SEC in the regular season, I
I
think.
The best month of the year is here, which is why you need to know that we are partnered with BetMGM. We'll be using BetMGM lines for making all of our picks and predictions, and we'll have special offers for the listeners and the viewers of the Field of 68. If you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, you can use bonus code FIELD and you will get up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager with BetMGM. Here's the best part. All you need to do is deposit and bet $10 of your hard-earned money to get it. This is what you have to do to make it work. Download the BetMGM app and sign up using that bonus code FIELD. Deposit at least $10 and place your first wager on any game. You'll get up to $1,500 in bonus bets if your bet loses. Just make sure you use that bonus code FIELD when you sign up. Most importantly, we have some fun stuff coming up for the rest of the NCAA tournament. Bet insurance tokens, college hoops odds boost, and the thing that I love the most, a nice little parlay boost, as well as a ridiculous array of prop bets for anything that you could possibly imagine betting on. From odds on getting to the Final Four to national championship futures, I'm calling it right now. BetMGM is the king of the prop bet. So go download the BetMGM app. Use that code FIELD and sign up today. And while I've got you, a quick request. The best way to support the Field of 68 content you get for free is to engage with us. Rate and review the pod in any podcast app. Like and share the YouTube videos that you enjoy. Tell your friends about us. It all helps in a world where the algorithm is king. And now, back to the show.
I think every home team that they're playing in conference play, except for Oklahoma, is a tournament team. I mean, Alabama is a preseason top three. They're my preseason number one. Arkansas, John Calipari reloaded roster. They're going to make the NCAA tournament, barring something unforeseen. Auburn, preseason top 20 team. Georgia has an NCAA tournament caliber roster, in my opinion, this year. Kentucky, preseason top 25 team. I don't think they're going to be a top 25 team, but they're still going to make the tournament under Mark Pope. Missouri with a top 3 recruiting class, reloaded roster with transfers. Dennis Gates going into a prove-it year. I think they're going to make the tournament. Oklahoma, I don't think makes a tournament. And then Tennessee and Texas A&M, 2 more preseason top 10, top 15 type teams. I mean, that's a tough home schedule. And now, like you said, Texas has played well at home. What they do in the non-conference slate will set the tone for how big or small of a home court advantage this is, because with Texas basketball, like they kind of need to prove it first before the people really pack the house and make it a formidable home atmosphere. And if they're like top 10 in the country going into January 1st and they have this insane SEC slate, like it's going to be a really fun schedule to watch play out. And I hope that with the excitement that they're able to generate in the non-conference slate and hopefully games that they win, we'll be in a position like that. The non-conference slate looks pretty good. They play Ohio State to begin the season. That's an exciting matchup. Jake Diebler's first game as full-time head coach of Ohio State. They brought in 2 high-profile transfers, and Duke transfer Sean Stewart and Kentucky transfer Aaron Bradshaw, 2 potential NBA draft picks next year if they pan out. And so I like that Ohio State team, and that's on a neutral court. And so we'll see how Texas plays there. And then the North Carolina State game is another one that I'm really excited about, especially because that game's in Raleigh, and Texas will play in a road atmosphere, an ACC road atmosphere, no less, against the team that made the Final Four last year. It's going to be a much different team with Mo Diarra out, and obviously DJ Burns, DJ Horn. But still, Kevin Keats, that program, they have a lot of momentum. And so that should be a high-profile game. And then you can't ignore the UConn matchup as well. And so I think that Texas is going to have an interesting run of things in the non-conference slate. And, we'll see who they fill these gaps in the non-conference slate with. So far, they've announced games against Houston Christian and Delaware State, 2 return customers. They tend to play those teams every year. They actually were losing to Delaware State at the under 12 media timeout this year in the second half. And so they ended up winning by like 15. But let it not be forgotten that Texas didn't have the easiest of runs with Delaware State.
There were some uneasy second halves last year, man. There were some uneasy times last year.
But, you know, really quick, I hope that they fill those gaps in the non-conference slate with, like, good mid-major teams. You know, they say no one wants to play McNeese State. If McNeese State will come to Austin, Will Wade will come to Austin, like, let's have them. That's an NCAA tournament team, and that would be great exposure for both programs. Nice home game for Texas against McNeese State. I'm super excited about that. If they would be able to pull that one off. And then like other teams like Samford, Bucky McMillan, they made the NCAA tournament last year. Take a look at trying to think of other strong mid-major programs. Like Furman would be a good program for Texas to play against. Wofford would be a good program for Texas to play against. Other mid-majors, like, you know, you just took some of the best players from Indiana State. Well, why don't you play their former head coach and against St. Louis? Like, that would be a great mid-major to play against. Robbie Avila coming to town, playing against his former teammates. Like, that would be fantastic. I hope that Texas schedules at least one or two mid-major opponents who are projected to be top 100 in the net rankings. Because what we're seeing all of these teams do, and unfortunately, it feels like Texas will do this, we're seeing teams schedule very top-heavy non-conference slates. You know, you play those MTEs or sort of open the season opening events where, you know, it gets you tournament type experience against high quality teams, you know, whatever. And then you play like bottom tier quad 4 opponents the rest of the non-conference slate to avoid bad losses presumptively and to improve your net ranking. And so I just hope that Texas actually plays beneficial, like good, hearty non-conference basketball games when they fill out this slate. And it feels like wishful thinking because, like, I'm sure the best we'll get is like Texas State or maybe North Texas if we're lucky.
Which I don't think those would be terribly boring, but
they play Texas State every year.
You're right. I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just saying you're right. McNeese State would be a lot of fun. I don't know if Texas would want that just because as much fun as that would be, I think there is some rationale with the thinking of you want to have those quad 3, quad 4 games just so you can have them under your belt, especially when you think about the non-conference games they've got already, and their SEC slate is going to be full of quad 1, quad 2 games. So Texas is going to have a chance from the get-go to build a strong tournament resume. I mean, they kind of headed along that path last year when they started off the year in New York City playing UConn and Louisville. They only lost to 10 by UConn, which, seeing how UConn did in the NCAA tournament, I mean, I would categorize that as, we don't take moral victories around here, but that's as close to a win as you can get considering how talented that team was. But regardless, I think those, and I don't mean this in a disrespectful way, but those cupcake kind of teams can be beneficial, especially considering the fact that there are so many new parts to this team, and it gives Rodney Terry a chance to experiment and see what works, see what lineups work for him, see who's doing what well, and allow, you know, Texas to come out of the gate with an idea of what they're wanting to do. Because, like, when you think about it, they're going to have something in place for Ohio State. Ohio State's not going to be a game where Rodney Terry's going to experiment heavily. But after that, he's going to take what he sees and go into that Delaware State game and that Houston Christian game and adjust, see what he can adjust, see what ends up working out well. So not to be the fun hater, but I kind of see the rationale behind the scheduling there. All right, we'll close with this.
But really quick, like, you just know it's going to be a bunch of duds then when they drop the non-conference schedule. Like we're going to be playing like Prairie View A&M and like Southeast Missouri State and like all that shit. Like I don't think that's good basketball ever, and it doesn't build any excitement on campus, especially like if the football team is like hosting a playoff game in December. Like, who is going to be excited about the basketball team playing Delaware State? No one.
Well, okay, if the football team's hosting Delaware State, it's not going to matter if UConn is in Austin. Like, they're going to go watch the football game. Like, if it falls on the same day, they're going to go watch football play. So, like, if Texas makes the college football playoff again and they play a basketball game at home on the same day, which would, by the way, would be a scheduling and traffic disaster, by the way. Unfortunately, just because of how big Texas football is here, the crowd that you would want is not going to show up anyways. That's just the unfortunate truth, I think. But regardless, I mean, I still think that you need those games to kind of, try some things out, give some of the younger guys playing time. Like Devin Pryor last year got his game experienced against the Houston Christians and the Delaware States. And maybe this is the year where he slides into a bigger role now that he's been in college for a full calendar year and he's been developed a little bit. So you have a good argument. I understand it. And I don't mean to rain on the parade here, but
I just want them to play good games, man.
But they're playing plenty of good games. That's the good part.
I know.
They're playing plenty of good games. But there's no shortage of that.
Like the SEC looks great next year. This is going to be our next topic is where Texas kind of fits in the SEC, and the SEC looks great next year. But Texas just played in the Big 12, and they were middle of the pack team in the Big 12. They played a horrible non-conference slate, and then they fizzled out in the round of 32. And you can't help but think that if they had played some better non-conference opponents, that would have been different last year. And yeah, they have another kind of top-heavy non-conference slate. For me, what will make this non-conference schedule different from last year will be who they play on the Wednesday nights in late November, middle of December. We know the winter break games are going to suck. We know the Thanksgiving break games, since they're not going to be in Maui or Atlantis, are going to suck too. But that's expected. That's fine. But they played Wyoming at home last year. I thought that was a good idea. Bring in another Mountain West team and play them at home. That's fine. Let's do something like that. It's just it doesn't help them prepare for a new league and a new speed. They're going to have a target on their back every night. And you don't prepare for that by playing Delaware State. You just don't.
Yeah, that's a fair point. We will make sure after the show to head on down to our good buddy Chris Del Conte's office and try to schedule some better non-conference games for Jason.
You know what I want to say really quick too? I've thought if you people tweet at him and he responds, and I was
hey Chris,
thinking about that.
Can you schedule McNeese State and Wyoming for us?
Yeah, I should have been at Chris Del Conte. Why can't Texas Student Television interview athletes on the field after games? Because he would have responded on there more, much bigger chance of him responding on there compared to if we were to have reached out to him directly or through someone else. And so, I've thought about that. Hey, at Chris Del Conte, do you guys want to play a home and home with Morehead State or McNeese State or another kind of low major powerhouse team who would kind of give you a run for your money, but it'd be good experience for both sides? It doesn't hurt.
No, it doesn't. It certainly doesn't. So let's end the show with expectations. SEC and tournament, I think is where we'll go here. Like I said earlier, this team absolutely should finish in the top half of the SEC. I would say probably around the 6th spot would be my guess. They were 7th in the Big 12 last year. So I think Texas finishes 5 or 6 in year one in the SEC, just because of that schedule. I think it is good to have all of those big games against the Alabamas, the Tennessees, the Auburns at home. Not saying they're going to win all those games, but it's much better to have them in Austin than going on the road to play.
Tommy, really quick, here's the thing. They don't play a lot of formidable road atmospheres in their first year in the SEC. And that's kind of disappointing to me almost. Florida hasn't been the atmosphere that it used to be. LSU hasn't been the atmosphere that it used to be. Ole Miss, those students will probably be fired up for the game because of Coach Beard, but that's not going to be a formidable road environment. Mississippi State, OU, I tell people here, the only sport that people care about Texas OU in is football. No one cares about that basketball game. And so in South Carolina too. Like that's just kind of a hollow environment. Sorry, but it is. And so like their only tough road games in conference play are Arkansas and A&M.
Yeah.
Those are going to be tough games. Like I mean, those people hate
Oh yeah.
Texas, and they have like especially A&M. That's going to be their best sports team this upcoming year. I believe in this Aggie basketball team. I really do. And so like to think that could be a top 10, top 15 type matchup, and those teams can just kind of duel it out in a sport other than football. Like the football game is going to be exciting. We're all excited for that. The baseball game is going to be, that one might get not as much attention as the football game, but it'll get a lot of attention. But I'm excited for the Texas A&M basketball game because those teams are going to be good and they play each other in College Station. And so let's just hope that everyone behaves themselves and that maybe the Longhorns can walk out with a win. What are your thoughts though? Looking at the SEC, it's a deep conference, but there's a lot of power at the top. You have Tennessee, Arkansas, Alabama, Auburn. I guess even Kentucky. Ole Miss did a really good job of reloading. A&M, those are all teams that at least think that they're competing for a national championship this year. Like, where does Texas fall in that group?
I think the middle, right? Like at least until we see how they are under a full SEC slate. There was so much talk during this transition of, when it was first announced that Texas was moving to the SEC, everybody thought it was going to be a fantastic basketball move because the Big 12 was just so much tougher and so much deeper than the SEC was at the time. Well, now you fast forward, Alabama's fresh off a Final Four. Arkansas just took John Calipari and basically half of the Kentucky roster. Kentucky even still did really well in the transfer portal. They took Brandon Garrison away from Texas and built pretty well there under Mark Pope. Bruce Pearl's doing a fantastic job at Auburn, and they got some key players to come back. Rick Barnes is always going to have a good squad at Tennessee, that they're going to grind you down on defense, and they're going to get enough done on the offensive side of the ball to beat you. So right off the bat, those are 5 teams that I think I didn't mention Alabama. Oh, I did at the beginning. Never mind. Those are 5 teams that I would say right now, without having played a game, are probably better than Texas. I could hear the debate on Kentucky just because that's a new staff, a brand new roster.
I'd hear the debate too. I'd probably laugh, but I'd hear the debate too.
I would listen to it, but we got to see it play. We got to see it play out first. That Kentucky roster has a bunch of talent on it. So that's why I say like that 5 or 6 spot just sounds right because Ole Miss, much better this year. I'll think Chris Beard, when he takes over a program, makes it better in year 2 and really year to year, has made it better. Florida, like I said, they've got a great staff, really good roster. They're kind of back on that climb up, seeing if they can get to where they used to be back in the early 2000s. And so in year 1 with Texas, with that favorable schedule, top half 5, 6. That's where I would project them. I think that's a comfortable spot. I think anything less than that, you think either it's just a massive disappointment or somebody's gotten hurt or something along those lines. And that's when you really got to start to ask some of the tough questions.
Yeah, I one way that people on the internet have been describing this Texas roster, I actually think it's somewhat accurate. It's a high ceiling, low floor team, especially in this conference. I completely agree with that. Like, I can unfortunately see a scenario like where the team doesn't, a lot of the players maybe don't reach their expectation level and they kind of flop and they struggle in the SEC because like this schedule is tough. Like every single team in the SEC next season, in my opinion, has a competitive roster to an extent. Like even Oklahoma, like I joke about Oklahoma not being an NCAA tournament team. And I'm serious, by the way. I really don't think that they're going to be an NCAA tournament team. But they still made like good additions. Like Duke Miles from High Point was a great ad. That was a guard who Texas was interested in. Kobe Elvis from Dayton, that's a pretty good ad as well. That's a guy who has prior high major experience too. And then they return Jalen Moore, Sam Goodwin, Luke Northweather, some size, which not a whole lot of teams in the SEC actually return. Like that's just an example of a middle of the pack team that like the good teams are going to be expected to beat, but that's still a good team in OU. Another one being South Carolina. This was a team who was a 6th seed in the NCAA tournament last year. Yes, they are losing certain pieces, but they returned their best player in Colin Murray-Boyles, and they also bring in transfers like Nick Pringle. Cam Scott is somebody who was committed to Texas, and now he gets to stay home at South Carolina and play a big role. And, the more I look at this Ole Miss roster as I look at it right now, they are dripping with talent. Dre Davis from Seton Hall or from Butler, being a big transfer. Sean Padula was one of the better guards in the portal, in my opinion. Mikal Brown-Jones had a big year last year. Malik Dia is a player with former SEC experience, and then he spends a year at Belmont and blows up. Another guy who Texas recruited. And John Bull was a 5-star recruit. So Ole Miss has a ton of talent. Like, the talent level in this conference, I think the difference between the SEC and the Big 12, like the Big 12, you have teams who they might not have the greatest rosters on paper, but they're so good at figuring out ways to win. You're going to play close, competitive basketball every night. And the SEC, you have some more unproven coaches because some of these programs have, less resources, less attention paid to them because it's a football conference. But the talent level is incredible in this conference. Just the 4-star, 5-star pedigree on just about every single roster is something that Texas is going to need to match night in and night out, and that'll be the biggest adjustment going into the SEC for me.
Yeah, no, I think you're spot on with that. I like the low floor, high ceiling, because I definitely agree that because of all the newness with this team, that is a question mark. I think that last year we were kind of under that spell too, where going into the year, Texas looked on paper like a top 15 team, and then they just kind of came out flat. And there were points in the year we were wondering whether or not they'd even make the tournament. So could that happen with this year's team? I think we could reach that point. I don't think this year compared to last year they'll hit that point, if I'm being completely honest. But could they kind of go through that same stage where they just come out flat, they lose games that they're not supposed to lose, or they look bad against opponents that they shouldn't look bad against? I can see that, but I can also see them rising to the occasion in big games and playing really well and beating some of the teams on their home court, maybe beating Auburn, Tennessee, Alabama on their home court. I don't think they'll beat UConn, but
when is that game going to be too? Like why? A lot of this is a little contingent to me too on like when these games are played. Like if that UConn game is the first week of December, so that's like, going to be, I remember like the Gonzaga game, for instance, or the Creighton game 2 years ago, first year of the Moody Center. Like, let's say Texas football is playing in the SEC championship, they win that game, and then they have the next week off. Like, if that UConn game is during that next week, whether Texas football is winning a lot or not winning a lot, the attention, at least for that day, should be on the basketball game. And so, like, that game needs to be scheduled at a time where like people are going to fully care about it as much as they should, and because it needs to be a raucous home environment at the Moody Center for that. It's the best team, reigning 2-time national champions. Like, come on, it better be a wild environment.
And I think it will be. I think the Texas athletic department is smart enough to schedule that at a smart time in the year. They're not going to overlap that with football. That would just be a horrible business decision. And if anybody knows how to make a business decision, it's the University of Texas. So last expectation wise, as far as the tournament, in my opinion, on paper, if they are close to that high ceiling that we were talking about, I think this is a Sweet 16 team. Making it to the Sweet 16. If they are in stride and they're rolling come March, like it might be a roller coaster throughout the season, like many Texas teams have been. But I think the difference between this year's team and last year's is that they've got a lot more depth to turn to if, someone's not letting it up. And I know we talked about this earlier. Last year, if Max Asmus and Dylan Masu weren't going, it's over. Like, the game was over. Tyrese Hunter was way too inconsistent. Caden Shedrick was on and off, and whether or not he was healthy. Dylan Mitchell was never a primary scoring option, and Kendall Weaver wasn't either. So with this year's team, you've got a lot more experience coming off the bench, and a lot more options in scoring in your starting five. So, I know you talked about how there might be too many mouths to feed, but that might be a better problem to have than just simply not having enough mouths at all. So if you combine that with how well Ronnie Terry has coached in the tournament, I think Texas continues to find success there under Ronnie Terry, and they should probably be a 5 or seed or better. And I think they're absolutely a Sweet 16 team if they hit their stride and if they live up if they live up close to their potential. Like, they don't have to hit their best potential to be a Sweet 16 team, I don't think. Like, they can get close to it and still be a solid squad.
I'm just so excited for this next season. I mean, it's July 7th right now, and we're months away from basketball season. In fact, we're over a month away from college football season. And I'm just so excited, so ready for this to start back up. The Big 12 was the best conference in basketball when Texas was in it. It still is going to be next year. I think that it goes Big 12 1, SEC 2, and Big 10 3 for basketball next year. And so there's not much of a drop off. There's actually not any drop off for Texas in terms of the quality of opponents, the talent who they are going to be facing night in and night out in the Southeastern Conference. So I'm just so excited, now that the roster is fully set and we can kind of visualize who it's going to be running out on the court for Texas next year, who they're going to face off against too. Just super, super exciting. And so we'll look to do another podcast as soon as that non-conference slate has been finalized, as long as there's a surprise or two. Like if it's going to be a bunch of Delaware states, forget about it. We'll tweet about it, but like we don't even know who's going to be on those teams. Like what's the point of previewing that? Like, I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I know who the Delaware State starting five is going to be. I will maybe by the middle of December, but definitely not now. But let's hope that Texas and the powers that be, the schedulers and the administrators, give us something to talk about again soon, and that Zach can join us, because I missed him.
I missed him too. And if Texas does fill up their schedule with a bunch of Delaware states, it'll just be me and him talking about it, and Jason will just kind of angrily tweet at Chris Del Conte instead. Thank you so much. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Something. Give us a former, give us someone who is all I ask, if they're going to schedule low majors, at least have them have been a top 3 seed in their conference tournament last year. That's all I ask.
That's a fair bar to set. I think Jason has a future as an athletic director. If he wants.
No. I'm going to stop talking before you suggest more things like that. I just packed up all my stuff and moved out to the middle of nowhere in Kansas because of this whole media thing. So
that's
can't give up on it quite yet.
You're pretty good at that whole thing too. So we'll keep you there for now. Thank you so much for taking some time in your summer to join us and listen to some college basketball talk. It's a year-round event for us, and we're super excited to bring you content like this in the off season as well. So thanks again for joining us here on the Hook 'em Hoops podcast, part of the Field of 68 podcast network. Make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, and give us a 5-star review on wherever you get your podcasts from. Feel free to reach out to us on Twitter if there's something that you would like to talk about on the next episode, and we'll be happy to discuss those things for you. So for Zach Davis, who couldn't be with us today, we miss you, buddy. Jason Kinander, I'm